Hi stamping friends, welcome back. Sandi MacIver here. Today I'm going to be sharing a Slimline card, and I'm also going to be doing layered stamping with the Altenew Build a Flower Poppy stamp set. This is a beautiful stamp set with a couple of large images and some leaves and some little backgrounds, and I think I used every stamp in the set. For my Slimline, I'm going to be using the PinkFresh Slim Diagonal Stitched Rectangles. Say that fast 3 times. For today's ink, I'm using Altenew, the mini cubes, and it's Frosty Pink, Coral Berry, Warm Sunshine, and Permanent Black, along with some of their markers. Using the layering guide that comes with the stamp set is really useful, but I like to do number 2, number 3, and then number 1. I like to do my outline last, and I find that it's more crisp that way. So we're going to start with a solid image, and the one thing you want to be careful of and use lots of magnets is these solid image stamps really pull your paper, and it will pull it out of the corner of your misti for you. So make sure it's well secured, and I'm starting with the lightest color, which is the Frosty Pink, and I'm going to stamp that a couple of times just to make sure I get good even coverage. And giving a good rub on the lid of my misti to make sure that I transfer the ink. Pinning the stamp, and I'm going to put it back in, and I'm going to grab the outline stamp that coordinates with this one. And it's got all those pretty little lines in it. So we're going to be stamping this with Coral Berry, which is a darker color in the same color family. Something that's nice about Altenew is they have great color families in their stamp and their ink pads, and you can buy a set of 4 of each family. So now I'm showing you where the outlines are. If you look closely on the layering guide, there's some lines in green and blue that show you specific spots to place. And I also use the center white spot of the flower to help me place where that second stamp is going to go. And so you want to fuss with it, get it exactly where you want it. I often pick up the corners to make sure that it's directly over top of where I want it to be. And again, I'm going to ink this up, and I'm going to do it twice to make sure I have good coverage. And there you go. Doesn't that add some fabulous detail? And then the outline just kind of sets it right off. So I'm going to clean that stamp, and what I do here is I'm going to stamp some of the leaves next, and I'm going to be coloring them. I want my flower ink to dry completely before I do my outline. So I'm using the Altenew Permanent Black, and I'm stamping the leaves. And for this card, you actually need 3 of them. I'm just going to show you the stamping for 1 card and 1 flower, just because it's repetitive. So again, cleaning that stamp and putting it away, and then I'm going to bring the outline stamp for my flower because that ink should be well dry by now. This is such a beautiful, beautiful flower. Again, the placement is very important, so go back and have a look at the layering guide. There are blue and green lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different places that you can use to line up. And remember, I also use that center white spot. So I'm inking up with my permanent, and I'm going to stamp this a couple of times as well to get that nice crisp outline. Next, there's a little tiny round stamp to do the center, and I'm going to do that in the Warm Sunshine. So I'm just positioning that, adding it to the lid of my misti, inking it up and giving it a good stamp. And then I'm going to grab my gray marker, and it's G07. I'm just going to add a darker center to my poppy. Next, I'm going to color my leaves, and I am using Altenew markers G702, 715, and 554. I like to start with the lightest color and flood the entire area, and what that does is it wets my paper and gets everything kind of primed to absorb and blend the darker colors. So starting with the lightest, flooding the entire area, and I'm using the wide tip. You get a narrow and a wide tip in each of the Altenew markers. I prefer to color with the wider one because it's got a really, really fine tip on it, so you can get into those tight areas. So then I'm coming back in with my medium, and that's my G715, and I'm adding highlights. And if you look at all the little fleck lines that the artist put in, you can see where you want to highlight and add a little bit of darker color. And I'm basically just scribbling it in there. And then I'm going to come back in with a G554, which is the darkest of the greens, and I'm going to add some veins and a little bit of shadowing, just a tiny bit. This is a really dark green and I don't want my picture too dark. And then I'm going to come back in with a light green and I'm going to blend it all together. And that just helps pull the color around as well. And again, you want to do this 3 times. You need 3 leaves and 3 flowers. And I did 1 of the big flowers and 2 of the buds. And then I'm going to take my coordinating dies and run them all through my die cutting machine. I'm clipping the stems off of the buds because the stems are on the leaves, so you don't need those little extra pieces. And I'm just kind of doing a rough layout of where I want my flowers to be on my Slimline card. And then I decide that, hey, maybe I should stick this into my misti because adding the sentiment is going to be a lot easier in there. So popping this back into my misti, and you'll see that my slimline piece, my background piece, is a little bit longer than the misti, and so it's okay to let one end hang out. It won't hurt it at all. So I'm placing back in where I want my flowers to be, but before I glue them down, I'm going to add the 3 sentiments from the stamp set to make sure that I've got enough room and I get my flowers lined up exactly where I want them and my sentiments exactly where I want them. And I'm starting from the left-hand side and I'm kind of layering them across, leaving a little bit of extra space and moving over to the right with each one. I thought that kind of added to the look of the card. And I'm adding a little bit of adhesive, just enough to kind of attach them into place in case I want to move them later. And a tip about moving them later, I'm using a tape runner. If you heat it up with your heat tool, it comes apart really easily, allowing you to move things around without tearing your paper. And I'm using the tombow tape runner for this. Okay, so it takes me a few minutes to get these all pieced exactly where I want them. Just adding this top one in. And I kind of figured I was going to be moving that one. That's why I didn't use very much tape. So I've banged all of my sentiments around. I need to straighten them out. And you get a final look at those when you close the lid of your misti, and you can see with the lines on the lid whether these are straight or not. And I'm adding a whole bunch of magnets to hold everything in place for me. Have a look, make sure it's straight. That top one's a little bit crooked, so I adjusted it just a tiny bit. And I'm coming back in with my permanent black ink, and I'm going to stamp these a couple of times to get a good solid image. I don't know why I'm double checking, it's too late. That top one is a tiny little bit crooked still, but I'm moving along. So that's how you get your sentiments all in there at once. And so now there are a couple of background stamps. There's 2 little tiny ones that have a flower and a few leaves, and then there's one that has just a couple of leaves. And I'm going to show you how I added those to the card. So I'm keeping everything back in, but I have moved my card up so that my bottom is now inside the misti and the top is just hanging out the top because I'm going to stamp down there and I don't want to bend the paper. So I've placed the 3 in there where I want them, putting my magnets back on to hold everything in place, closing my misti, and I'm going to stamp with the permanent black ink again because I'm going to be coloring these with the alcohol markers as well, so you don't want anything running. And I do a double stamp for a nice crisp dark image. And then what you want to do is clean your stamps with your little chamois, and then you're going to move them up around the next flower and positioning them a different way so that they don't look the same as the ones below. So twist them or turn them so that they're going a different way, adding the little leaves up by the top one. And again, doing 2 stamping, and make sure if you get any ink marks from your ink pad that you remove it from the lid, otherwise it might transfer. So you see me do that with the Kleenex over on the right hand side there. Okay, and cleaning the stamps again. And I'm going to pull my art piece down just a hair because I'm going to be stamping at the top. And so this time the bottom is going to hang out of the misti and the top is going to be flat because that's where I'm stamping. So I'm kind of fussing with where I'm going to position these because there's just a tiny little space there at the top, but it's enough to sneak that flower in. So the final stamping of the background, getting those in there, and then we're going to color them. At this point, you can snip off any of the overhangs, just turn it over and line it up. And I left one so that I could have it kind of outside the box when I put the card together. And I'll show you that at the end. So I'm grabbing some of my markers. I'm using the Altenew markers, obviously. And for the pinks, I'm using R302 and R304. For the yellow, Y204, and for the green, just the light and the medium. I'm not using the dark. So I color all the flowers in with the light, then I go back and add just the center highlights with the medium. And I'm going to do the same thing with the leaves. I'm going to color them in the lightest color, and then I'm going to add the veins back in with the medium. Sorry, my camera's telling me that it doesn't have enough color to look at, so it goes a little blurry there for a sec. Okay, so I'm just doing a couple to show you. There's the light, and then coming back in and just doing the veins with the medium, and then you're going to go all the way up the card and do that. I have a mat cut. It's a 1/8 inch bigger than the art piece, and it's done in the Simon Says Cotton Candy. And then my card base is 8 by 9 1/4, and it's scored and folded at 4 to create the Slimline Card base. And once you have all of those attached, then you want to turn your card over and do the final trim of your overhanging pieces. See, I've got it in the bottom left-hand corner here, and I did it in the top left-hand corner on the other card. Finally, I used a few of these colored dots from Altenew as a embellishment, just to add a little bit of yellow to the background. There we go, all finished, and I love all the white space and the pretty background too. So the supply list for today's project is listed underneath this video. There's also a link over to my blog where you can get it. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider giving me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. And until next time, toodles.